Standard Deviation by Habiba, Ali, and Sagana Prabhakaran.
What is standard deviation? Standard deviation is a number used to tell how measurements for a group are spread out from the average or expected value. Low standard deviation indicates that the data points tend to be very close to the mean. High standard deviation indicates that the data points are spread out over a large range of value. Three-to-four-year-old explanation of standard deviation. This concept will be explained by a kindergarten teacher to 3 to 4-year-old children through a lesson.
Good morning, boys and girls. Today, we will be doing a fun activity, so gather around and sit in a big circle on the carpet. The teacher then placed 5 dolls on the carpet of various heights in random order. By looking at the dolls, who can tell me which doll is the tallest? Yes, Timothy?
This one.
You're almost there, Timothy. Let's all work together as a class to line the dolls up from tallest to shortest. 15 minutes later, with the teacher's guidance, the children had lined up the dolls from tallest to shortest and were then asked to identify the middle doll together. Which dolls are closest to the middle doll? Yes, Kimberly?
This doll and that doll.
That is correct. Those 2 dolls are beside the middle doll because they are closest in height to it, so there is only a small difference between the heights. Which doll do you think is the shortest doll? Yes, Jackson?
This doll.
Great work, Jackson. Now, who can tell me which doll is the tallest? Yes, Stella?
This one.
Yes, you are correct, Stella. These dolls at the end are the farthest away from the middle doll because their heights are more different. The shortest doll is much more smaller in height than the middle doll, and the tallest doll is much more bigger in height.
Twelve-year-old explanation of standard deviation. This concept will be explained by an elementary school teacher to 12-year-old children through a lesson.
Good morning, boys and girls. Today, we are going to be focusing on a math problem that uses a bar graph to record the number of successful basketball shots made per student. By looking at this bar graph, who can tell me what is the average points scored by the students? Yes, Tim?
The average points scored by a student is 5.
How did you get 5, Tim?
Well, I first added all the number of points scored by each student, and then I divided by the number of students.
Great work, Tim. With the average points scored by a student being 5, this tells us that most students got around 5 points. Who can tell me who got exactly 5 points? Yes, Simon?
Max got 5 points.
Good job, Simon. Since Max got exactly 5 points, his shooting accuracy can be considered average. Now, who can tell me which students are closest to making the average of 5 points? Yes, Emily?
Peter and Nate are closest to the average points scored because Peter scored 4 points and Nate scored 6 points, meaning they're only off from the average by 1 point.
Yes, that is correct, Emily. Now, by looking at the bar graph, Who can tell me which students are farther away from the average points scored by a student? Yes, Henry?
It is Alex and Jack, since they're at the ends and Alex only scored 1 point and Jack scored 9 points.
Yes, you are correct, Henry. Alex scored the lowest point, which explains why he is farther away from the average points scored. On the other hand, Jack scored the highest point, which explains why he is also farther away from the average points scored. So class, although the points scored by Alex and Jack represents a large distance from the average points scored by students, Alex scored 1 point, which indicates a greatly lower score than the average point scored of 5. However, Jack scored 9 points, and this represents a greatly higher score than the average point scored of 5.
BCD 606 Student Explanation of Standard Deviation. This concept will be explained by a professor to BCD students.
Good morning, everyone. Today, we will be learning about standard deviation. What is standard deviation? Can anyone take a guess? Yes, Ariel?
Is this something to do with statistics and mean?
Yes, Ariel. You are on the right track. Standard deviation is a number used to tell us how measurements for a group are spread out from the mean, or in other words, average or expected value. Let's look at the results of a midterm exam on our graph called a normal distribution curve. The middle of the curve represents the mean score on a test, which represents the typical grade that can be expected from a BCD student. Fewer students with very high or very low scores are represented on the ends of the curve. This tells us that standard deviation is a measure of dispersion, which measures how spread out the data is from the mean. The further the data spreads away from the mean, the higher the standard deviation. The closer the data spreads around the mean, the lower the standard deviation. Therefore, by looking at this example, this graph indicates a high standard deviation due to the students' scores being spread out away from the mean, with few individuals achieving very high or very low scores on the test. So based on this information, why do you think standard deviation is important in research? Yes, Rebecca?
I believe standard deviation is important because when we analyze quantitative data, we would need to consider how participants are responding in general, such as mean, median, and mode. We then need to consider how far apart or close together participants' responses are. Therefore, to get a deeper understanding about the nature of the data, we can consider standard deviation.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. Standard deviation is linked with quantitative approach to research, which produces numerical data and statistical analysis, which is the use of techniques that can process large amounts of numerical data and reveal trend. Also, standard deviation is a descriptive statistic because it describes the data in terms of frequencies, average, or ranges.